The story of the world's first cathedral does not begin with a prayer. It begins with a plot. It is a tale rooted not in piety, but in the dark heart of Roman politics, on a patch of earth paid for with the blood of a senator and consecrated by the ambition of an emperor. Long before it became the seat of popes and the mother and head of all churches, the land of the Lateran was a stage for treason, retribution, and the raw, unforgiving exercise of imperial power. To understand the sacred edifice that stands today, one must first descend into the soil beneath its foundations, a ground layered with the ghosts of a fallen dynasty and the legions of a pagan empire. In the 1st century of the Roman Empire, the Caelian Hill was dominated by the opulent estate of one of Rome's most illustrious families, the Plautii Laterani. They were a dynasty of immense wealth and influence, with a lineage stretching back to the very foundations of the Republic. Their ancestor, Lucius Sextius Lateranus, had achieved the unthinkable in 366 BC, becoming the first plebeian to attain the rank of consul, shattering the patrician monopoly on power and carving the family name into the annals of Roman history. For centuries, the Laterani served as trusted administrators and advisors to a succession of emperors, their names synonymous with status and proximity to power. By the reign of Emperor Nero, the family was represented by Plautius Lateranus, a consul designate whose life of privilege had been marred by scandal and then restored by the very emperor he would come to betray. Tacitus, the great Roman historian, records that in 65 AD, Lateranus joined the Pisonian conspiracy, a desperate and sprawling plot to assassinate the increasingly tyrannical Nero. Lateranus was no mere follower. He was a key player, his own magnificent palace on the Caelian Hill serving as a clandestine meeting place for the conspirators. The plan was audacious, born of fear and a desire to halt the emperor's bloody purges and erratic behavior. But the conspiracy was doomed. Betrayal unraveled the plot, and Nero's retribution was swift and merciless. Plautius Lateranus was arrested and condemned to death. According to the accounts, he met his end with a stoicism befitting his noble lineage, refusing to name his co-conspirators even as the executioner's sword fell. His death, however, was not the end of Nero's vengeance. In a final crushing act of imperial authority, the emperor confiscated the entirety of the Laterani family's vast properties, including the sprawling estate on the Caelian Hill. The land, once a symbol of republican achievement and aristocratic pride, was now the personal property of the emperor, acquired through bloodshed and political failure. This violent transfer of ownership marks the foundational irony of the Archbasilica of St. John Lateran. The ground upon which the holiest site of Western Christendom would one day rise was first acquired not through a sacred gift, but as the spoils of a failed coup. The very name it bears, Lateran, is not that of a saint, but a permanent, indelible reminder of a family destroyed by the state, a name forever linked to treason and imperial wrath. The seed of the world's first cathedral was planted in soil tainted by political intrigue and watered with the blood of a condemned senator. This dark legacy forms the first crucial layer of a history where the sacred and the profane are inextricably and often violently intertwined. For over a century after Nero's seizure, the Lateran estate remained in imperial hands, a prime piece of real estate passed between emperors. Its fate took a decisive turn in 193 AD, under the reign of the formidable Emperor Septimius Severus. A military man to his core, Severus saw the strategic value of the land and chose it for a project that would stamp the site with an unmistakable symbol of pagan imperial might. On a portion of the former Laterani grounds, he ordered the construction of a massive military complex, the Castra Nova Equitum Singularium. This was no ordinary barracks. It was the new fort of the Roman imperial cavalry bodyguards, the elite, hand-picked horse guard fiercely loyal to the person of the emperor. The Equites Singulares Augusti were the pagan emperor's praetorians on horseback, a symbol of the raw physical power that underpinned his rule. Their fortress on the Caelian hill was a statement of military dominance, a constant and visible reminder of who held ultimate authority in Rome. Archaeological excavations have confirmed the sheer scale of this complex, with substantial remains of the fort discovered lying directly beneath the central nave of the modern basilica. The establishment of the Castra Nova fundamentally altered the character of the Lateran site. Where once stood the luxurious domus of a noble family, there was now a fortress, a bastion of the very military and religious order that viewed the nascent Christian faith with suspicion and frequently hostility. For more than 100 years, this ground was dedicated to the protection of the pagan emperors, the air filled not with chants and prayers, but with the sounds of cavalry drills and the oaths of soldiers sworn to the gods of Rome. This transformation establishes a powerful symbolic conflict, setting the stage for one of history's most dramatic reversals. The ground was not neutral territory waiting for a sacred purpose. It was actively occupied by the enemy. It was a physical manifestation of the pagan Roman state, a fortress dedicated to the imperial cult and the military power that enforced its will. Before this land could become the house of God, it was first the house of the emperor's most trusted and most loyal pagan defenders. This fact makes the events that followed not merely a new chapter, but a revolution. The year is 312 AD. The Roman Empire is fractured by civil war. Two men vie for control of its western heart: Maxentius, who holds Rome, and Constantine, who marches south from Gaul to challenge him. The fate of the empire and of a burgeoning world religion would be decided on the outskirts of the city, at a crossing of the Tiber River known as the Milvian Bridge. In this epic confrontation, the elite imperial horse guard, the Equites Singulares stationed at the Lateran, remained loyal to their master and rode out to fight for Maxentius. The story of the battle is legendary. Constantine, on the eve of the clash, is said to have had a vision. His biographer, Eusebius, tells of a cross of light appearing in the heavens with the words, "In hoc signo vinces." By this sign you shall conquer." Constantine ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian monogram, the Chi-Rho, on their shields. The next day, his forces crushed the army of Maxentius, who drowned in the Tiber during the retreat. Constantine entered Rome as the undisputed ruler of the West. His victory was followed by a calculated and deeply symbolic act of revenge. The Equites Singulares, who had backed the losing side, were disbanded. But Constantine went further. He ordered their magnificent barracks on the Lateran hill, the Castra Nova, to be utterly demolished, razed to the ground in an act of damnatio memoriae, the formal damnation of memory. He would not simply defeat his enemies. He would erase their very presence from the landscape of his new capital. The land itself, now cleared of its military past, had formally come into Constantine's possession through his marriage to Fausta, the sister of the defeated Maxentius. The entire estate, known at this time as the Domus Faustae, or House of Fausta, was now his to command. In a move that would change the course of history, Constantine gifted this politically charged piece of land, along with the adjoining palace, to the Bishop of Rome, Pope Miltiades. The timing was immediate and significant. The gift was made in time for the palace to host a synod of bishops in 313 AD, convened to challenge the Donatist schism, one of the first great theological crises of the newly liberated Church. This act reveals Constantine as a political masterstroke. The foundation of what would become the Lateran Basilica was far more than an emperor's pious donation. It was a calculated demonstration of a new world order. By building the first great Christian basilica not on neutral ground, but on the literal rubble of his rival's most loyal military unit, Constantine sent an unmistakable message. The old pagan military establishment was finished. A new power, the Christian Church, was now allied with the throne. The physical landscape of Rome was being rewritten to reflect this monumental shift. The emperor was not just tolerating Christianity, he was elevating its leader, giving the Bishop of Rome a palace and a plot of land steeped in imperial history. The foundation of the Lateran was an act of political theater, cementing an alliance that would define the next 1,000 years of Western civilization and physically replacing a fortress of the old gods with a house for the new one. On November 9, 324 AD, Pope Sylvester I, successor to Miltiades, presided over the official consecration of the new basilica. By the will of the emperor, it was dedicated to Christo Salvatore, Christ, the Savior. This dedication was a bold and defiant proclamation in a city whose skyline was still dominated by temples to pagan deities. The name of the site itself was transformed. The imperial Domus Faustae became the Domus Dei, the House of God. The structure Constantine financed was breathtaking in its scale and opulence. It was a grand, five-aisled church built in the Roman Basilican style, a long rectangular hall with a central nave and flanking aisles, a design previously used for law courts and public audience halls, now repurposed for Christian liturgy. Imperial patronage ensured no expense was spared. The Liber Pontificalis, a collection of papal biographies, records immense donations of gold and silver, including 7 silver altars and 7 golden candelabra. Its splendor was so legendary that it quickly earned the nickname Basilica Aurea, the Golden Basilica. More important than its wealth was its function. The adjacent Lateran Palace became the official residence of the popes, and the basilica became the Pope's Cathedral, his official ecclesiastical seat, or cathedra. For the next 1,000 years, from the 4th to the 14th century, this complex was the heart and soul of the papacy. It was from the Lateran that popes governed the burgeoning church, where they were consecrated, where they held councils, and where they lived. This functional primacy gave rise to its ultimate, enduring title, inscribed on its facade for all to see: Sacrosancta Lateranensis Ecclesia Omnium Orbis et Orbis Ecclesiarum Mater et Caput, Most Holy Lateran Church, Mother and Head of all the churches in the city and the world. This established a crucial distinction that persists to this day. While Constantine also founded a great basilica over the tomb of St. Peter on the Vatican Hill, that structure was primarily a martyrium, a magnificent funerary church built to honor the burial place of the first apostle and to serve the growing number of pilgrims who flocked there. The Lateran, by contrast, was established from its very inception as the seat of the living Bishop of Rome, the administrative and liturgical center of the diocese, and by extension, the universal church. St. Peter's was the shrine of the dead apostle. The Lateran was the throne of his living successor. This historical reality is the source of the Lateran's superior rank. Despite the eventual grandeur and fame of the new St. Peter's Basilica, built over a millennium later, the Lateran has never relinquished its legal and theological status as the Pope's true cathedral. This explains the modern paradox. The Pope lives in the Vatican, but his home church, the mother church of all Catholicism, is across the city on the Caelian Hill. The splendor of the Basilica Aurea was a beacon, attracting not only pilgrims, but also plunderers. The history of the Lateran is a relentless cycle of destruction and rebirth, its physical fortunes mirroring the tumultuous history of Rome and the papacy itself. The building became a powerful allegory for the church it represented, repeatedly brought to the brink of annihilation, yet always rising from the ruins. The first major blow came in 455 AD during the Vandal sack of Rome. The Germanic king Genseric and his forces swept into a defenseless city and, as the historian Procopius notes, systematically looted its treasures. The Golden Basilica, with its vast stores of imperial donations, was a prime target. Its silver altars and golden candelabra were stripped away, leaving the great church a hollowed-out shell of its former glory. In the aftermath, it was Pope Leo the Great, the same pontiff who had famously persuaded Genseric not to burn the city or massacre its people, who took on the task of restoration, beginning the first of many rebuilds that would define the basilica's existence. 4 centuries later, the basilica faced a disaster born not from foreign invasion, but from the depths of papal depravity. In 897 AD, the halls of the Lateran became the stage for one of the most bizarre and grotesque episodes in church history, the Cadaver Synod. Pope Stephen VI, consumed by a vindictive hatred for his deceased predecessor, Pope Formosus, had the latter's 9-month-old corpse exhumed. The decaying body was dressed in full pontifical vestments, propped up on a throne in the basilica, and subjected to a macabre mock trial. The dead pope was convicted. His fingers of blessing were hacked off, and his body was thrown into the Tiber. This horrifying spectacle seemed to provoke a judgment from nature itself. Shortly after the synod, in either late 896 or early 897, a violent earthquake shook Rome to its core. The Lateran Basilica, the scene of the sacrilege, collapsed. One account states it was destroyed from the altar to the doors, a ruin so complete that the lines of the original Constantinian building were difficult to trace. To the people of Rome, the connection was undeniable. The ground itself had shuddered in revulsion at the events that had transpired within the holy walls. The final and perhaps most devastating blows came in the 14th century, a period of profound crisis for the papacy. In 1309, the papal court abandoned Rome for Avignon, France, beginning a nearly 70-year exile. The Lateran, the Pope's abandoned cathedral and palace, was left to neglect and decay. In 1308, and again more severely in 1361, catastrophic fires swept through the complex. The second fire left the basilica and palace in such a ruinous state that they were deemed uninhabitable. When Pope Gregory XI finally returned the papacy to Rome in 1377, he found his ancient seat a charred and crumbling wreck. This state of utter disrepair was a primary factor in the momentous decision to establish the new permanent papal residence on the Vatican Hill, next to the fortified Castel Sant'Angelo and the great pilgrimage basilica of St. Peter. The physical history of the Lateran thus becomes an unavoidable metaphor. It is sacked and stripped bare during the death throes of the Western Roman Empire. It is shaken to its very foundations by an earthquake that follows an act of unparalleled papal corruption. It is consumed by fire and abandoned to ruin during a period of schism and papal exile. The building's story is a moral and political drama written in stone, ash, and rubble, its constant survival and reconstruction a potent symbol of the Church's own claim to divine protection and institutional resilience in the face of both external attack and internal decay. In November 1215, the Lateran Basilica hosted the most significant and well-attended ecumenical council of the entire Middle Ages. Convened by Pope Innocent III, a pontiff at the absolute zenith of papal power and influence, the Fourth Lateran Council was an assembly of staggering scale. Over 400 bishops, 800 abbots and priors, and countless envoys from the crowned heads of Europe filled the ancient basilica, transforming it into the nerve center of Christendom. The council's purpose was ambitious and twofold: the reform of the Church and the recovery of the Holy Land. The 70 canons, or decrees, that Innocent III presented to the Assembly were not debated but approved, and their impact would be felt for centuries. At the heart of the council's work was the precise definition of Catholic dogma. Canon 1, in a landmark decision, formally sanctioned the term transubstantiation to describe the mystery of the Eucharist. This gave a specific scholastic definition to the belief that the bread and wine during the Mass are transformed into the actual body and blood of Christ. This act of theological clarification would become a cornerstone of Catholic identity and a major point of contention during the Protestant Reformation 3 centuries later. The Council's reach extended far beyond theology, deeply into the lives of ordinary people. Canon 21, famously known as omnis utriusque sexus, all of either sex, mandated that every Christian who had reached the age of discretion was required to confess their sins to their own parish priest at least once a year, and to receive Holy Communion during the Easter season. This decree fundamentally reshaped the spiritual landscape of Europe. It embedded the sacrament of penance into the fabric of daily life, institutionalized the role of the parish priest as a spiritual gatekeeper, and vastly increased the Church's direct pastoral authority over the laity. However, the Council also cast a long and dark shadow. It was here, within the walls of the Pope's Cathedral, that intolerance was codified into canon law. Seeking to enforce a rigid Christian social order, the Council issued decrees with devastating consequences for non-Christians. Canon 68 mandated that Jews and Muslims, in all Christian lands and at all times, must wear distinctive clothing to be visibly separated from the Christian populace. The stated purpose was to prevent prohibited intercourse, but the effect was to create a visual marker for persecution. Furthermore, Jews were forbidden from appearing in public during the solemn days of Holy Week, reinforcing the narrative of collective Jewish guilt for the death of Christ. These laws did not emerge from a vacuum. They reflected rising anti-Semitism in Europe, but their formalization by the highest authority in the Church provided a legal and theological justification for centuries of discrimination, segregation, and violence, laying the groundwork for the ghettos and pogroms of the future. The same council that defined the Eucharist also defined the other, setting in motion forces that would stain the history of the continent. The Fourth Lateran Council stands as a testament to the immense power wielded from the Lateran. It was an event that simultaneously sought to purify the Church from within while violently policing its external borders, leaving a complex legacy of profound spiritual regulation and institutionalized intolerance. By the mid-17th century, the ancient basilica was on the verge of collapse. In preparation for the Jubilee of 1650, Pope Innocent X turned to the most audacious and revolutionary architect of the age, Francesco Borromini. His rival, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, may have been the master of grand theatrical sculpture, But Borromini was the master of complex, dynamic, and emotionally charged architectural space. The Pope's commission was daunting: save the ancient church, give it a modern Baroque interior, but do so without destroying its most sacred and historic elements. The five-aisled plan of the Constantinian original had to be respected, and the precious 15th-century cosmatesque floor and the magnificent 16th-century gilded wooden ceiling, designed by Giacomo della Porta from a plan by Michelangelo, had to be preserved. Borromini's solution was a work of constrained genius. Faced with the decaying columns of the medieval nave, he chose not to replace them, but to encase them. He wrapped the ancient columns within massive new piers of plaster and stone, creating a powerful, syncopated rhythm down the length of the nave. This structural reinforcement was also an aesthetic masterstroke. Into these monumental piers, he carved 12 colossal, deeply recessed niches, framed by edicules that reused green marble from the original basilica's columns. These niches, left vacant for decades, were destined to be filled in the early 18th century with dramatic, larger-than-life statues of the 12 apostles, sculpted by the premier artists of the late Baroque and Rococo periods. Borromini's work was a masterclass in architectural dialogue. Unlike the wholesale demolition and reconstruction that created the new St. Peter's, his intervention at the Lateran was a conversation with history. He did not erase the past. He contained it, reinterpreted it, and built upon it. The soaring white stuccos, the dramatic play of light and shadow, the powerful sense of movement, all hallmarks of his unique style, were woven into the ancient framework. The result is an interior that is at once a unified Baroque masterpiece and a physical palimpsest, a visible layering of the Constantinian, medieval, and counter-Reformation eras. The architecture itself tells a story of transformation, showing how the confident, dynamic spirit of the 17th century church was literally built around the venerable, sacred bones of its ancient predecessor. While Borromini had redefined the basilica's interior, its main eastern facade remained a patchwork of medieval and early Renaissance additions. By the 18th century, it was deemed unworthy of the Mother Church of the world. In 1732, Pope Clement XII, a member of the Florentine Corsini family, announced a competition to design a new grand entrance, one of the first modern architectural competitions in history. The winning design came from a fellow Florentine, Alessandro Galilei, a distant relative of the great astronomer Galileo. Completed in 1735, Galilei's facade is a monumental work of late Baroque classicism, so grand and imposing that it has often been described as looking more like a palace than a church. It is a colossal two-story screen of travertine stone, defined by giant columns and pilasters that create a powerful vertical thrust, broken only by the horizontal line of the benediction loggia in the center. Crowning this architectural statement is a balustrade supporting 15 gigantic statues, each standing 7 meters tall. In the center stands Christ the Savior, a nod to the basilica's original dedication. He is flanked by St. John the Baptist, and St. John the Evangelist, its later patrons, and an assembly of the great doctors of the Church. These towering figures, silhouetted against the Roman sky, form a celestial court, a triumphant assertion of the Church's authority and permanence. Galilee's facade provided the final, definitive face for the ancient basilica, a majestic and unyielding statement of power that has greeted pilgrims and visitors for nearly 3 centuries. The heart of the basilica is its papal altar, which can only be used by the Pope or his designated representative. Sheltering it is a magnificent Gothic baldacchino, an ornate canopy dating to 1369, a rare and beautiful example of the style in Rome. But the altar itself holds a secret. Unlike almost every other major altar in the Catholic world, which must be made of stone, the papal altar at the Lateran is made of wood. This is because it encases a much older, humbler artifact, a simple wooden tabletop upon which, according to ancient tradition, St. Peter himself celebrated the Eucharist in the house of the Roman senator Pudens. This relic establishes a direct physical link between the current Pope and the first, a continuity of the Eucharistic mystery across 2 millennia. High above this altar, nestled within the intricate Gothic spires of the baldacchino, are the basilica's most prized and macabre treasures. 2 silver-gilt reliquary busts, gleaming behind a grate, are said to contain the skulls, or at least major portions of the skulls, of the 2 pillars of the Roman Church, St. Peter and St. Paul. These relics transformed the Lateran into a premier pilgrimage destination, a place where the faithful could come into the presence of the founding apostles. The very doors of the basilica tell a story of conquest and appropriation. The massive central bronze doors that lead into the nave are not of Christian origin. They are far older, dating back to the Roman Empire. These were the doors to the Curia Julia, the Senate house in the Roman Forum, a building first commissioned by Julius Caesar himself. For centuries, they witnessed the debates and decrees that governed an empire. In 1660, Pope Alexander VII ordered them removed from the ruins of the Forum and installed at the entrance to his cathedral, a powerful act of spolia, the reuse of ancient materials. This practice of appropriating symbols of past power reaches its zenith in the piazza outside. There stands the Lateran obelisk, the largest and oldest standing ancient Egyptian obelisk in the entire world. Carved from red granite in the 15th century BC for Pharaoh Thutmose III, it stood for over a millennium at the Temple of Amun in Karnak. The Roman Emperor Constantius II had it brought to Rome in 357 AD to adorn the central spine of the Circus Maximus, the great chariot racing stadium. Buried and forgotten after the fall of the empire, it was rediscovered in pieces in the 16th century. In 1588, the great urban planning Pope, Sixtus V, had it painstakingly restored and re-erected in its current location. These artifacts are not a random collection. They form a deliberate and powerful political narrative written in stone, bronze, and bone. by incorporating the doors of the Roman Senate, an Egyptian obelisk from the time of the pharaohs, and the relics of the apostles. The papacy was making a visual and theological claim to be the rightful heir to all previous forms of power, the political authority of Rome, the ancient wisdom of Egypt, and the spiritual mandate of the first disciples. The basilica is not just a church. It is a masterpiece of spolia, a collage of history where the trophies of fallen empires are repurposed to glorify the triumph of the cross. In the popular imagination, the center of the Catholic world is the Vatican. It is the iconic dome of St. Peter's Basilica that dominates the Roman skyline, St. Peter's Square, that fills with the faithful for papal blessings, and the Vatican city-state that stands as the sovereign territory of the Holy See. It is a perception reinforced by centuries of art, ceremony, and history. Yet, it is a perception built on a historical paradox. For all its grandeur and global recognition, St. Peter's Basilica is not the Pope's cathedral. The true seat of the Bishop of Rome, the actual cathedra from which the word cathedral derives, resides in the older, historically preeminent, and often overlooked Archbasilica of St. John Lateran. The Lateran is the mother and head of all the churches in the city and the world, not as a mere honorific, but as a statement of historical and theological fact. It was the first Christian basilica, the first papal residence, and the center of church governance for 1,000 years, a tenure far longer than that of the Vatican. It was at the Lateran that 5 ecumenical councils were held, forging the laws and doctrines that defined medieval Christendom. The Vatican only rose to prominence after the popes returned from their exile in Avignon in the 14th century to find their ancient home at the Lateran a smoldering ruin. While St. Peter's became the magnificent stage for the universal pastor, the Lateran remained his specific foundational seat as Bishop of Rome. This ancient primacy has been reasserted in the modern era. On February 11, 1929, the treaty that resolved the Roman question and created the independent Vatican city-state was signed not at the Vatican, but in the Lateran Palace, forever known as the Lateran Treaty. In a more recent and subtle gesture, Pope Francis has made a deliberate practice of dating and signing major papal documents from the Lateran, a quiet but powerful reminder to the world of the true location of his episcopal throne and the deep historical roots of his office. The Archbasilica of St. John Lateran is, therefore, far more than a church. It is a 1,700-year-old chronicle of Western civilization, written and rewritten in layers of stone, mosaic, and marble. It is built on land seized by a pagan emperor and founded on the rubble of his defeated army. It has been sacked by barbarians, shaken by earthquakes, and consumed by fire, its physical history mirroring the convulsions of the church and the city it commands. It has been the silent witness to the forging of laws that defined nations and dogmas that shaped souls. It is a treasure house of relics and spoils, asserting its succession to the empires of both Rome and Egypt. It is the true, and often forgotten, throne of the world's oldest continuing institution, a testament to the enduring power of faith, politics, and the indelible mark they leave upon the world. If this journey through 1,700 years of history has sparked your curiosity, there is so much more to uncover. To dive deeper into the incredible stories and unresolved mysteries of the Lateran, check out the links in the description and the first pinned comment below. We've compiled a list of authoritative books and resources that will take you even further into the heart of this monumental story. What part of the Basilica's history shocked or fascinated you the most? Was it the blood price of its land, the Cadaver Synod, or the ancient relics hidden within its walls? Let us know in the comments below. Your insights fuel our next historical revelation. And if you believe that history is the greatest story ever told, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss where we're going next.